Well, thank you very much, and thank you for coming out, and thank you, Wayne, for that introduction. Hopefully, with the presentation that I give tonight, you will have hope, if not optimism, about a better future. And the difference between the two is this, that as I understand it, hope is if you can see yourself in a better future. And optimism is whether or not you think that's likely. And I do have hope, and I'm going to hopefully share with you my vision of that hopeful future. And you can decide for yourself whether or not to be optimistic about that future. Okay? So I'm going to start with a little bit of background about myself, what brings me here. I'm not going to bore you with the whole story, but this actually, in this photograph, this is me when I had a different barber. And I'm still an engineer, and I still do work for Engineers Geoscientists Manitoba, but I have had an entire career in manufacturing. So I know the realities of business and manufacturing and commercial enterprise, that kind of thing. But in the year 2016, I saw a movie called An Inconvenient Truth. Who's seen that movie? Great, that's good to know. That's Al Gore's movie. It came out a long time ago now, but it changed my life. Because within 8 months of seeing that movie, I was working full-time on climate change. This is a photograph here of my colleague Susan. Susan and I have been working together for 16 years on climate change. We've been working on climate change education for Manitobans and working on solutions in Manitoba. Susan focuses on educators and youth, and I focus on policy and solutions like that. The Road to Resilience was created by the Climate Action Team. And you can see across the bottom of this slide the 5 organizations that comprise the Climate Action Team. And what brought us together was we'd been working unofficially for a number of years, collaborating on various things. But the previous government in 2017 came up with their so-called Climate and Green Plan. And it was kind of like presented to us, to the world, to Manitobans, and said, here it is. And we kind of went, well, even though many of us were involved in the consultation, so-called, to the creation of it, we said, wow, people haven't really been involved in this. So we put together, this is a photograph of the town hall that we did at the University of Winnipeg, where we had those round tables, and we had discussion groups facilitated, and scribes, and we collected all this really good information. And at the end of the evening, we said, what are we going to do with this? We don't want to waste it, because there's a lot of really good ideas here. And if we combine those ideas with the work that we've already been doing, maybe we can come up with something. And the work that we then embarked upon, the story we tried to come up with, and the solutions we tried to come up with, were focused on the targets that were set out for us, primarily in this document that you see here. This is the IPCC 1.5 report, and it's a real watershed, an extremely important document. There's a lot of details in it, but there's a couple of key points that I'm going to share with you. Within it, this is the first one, and just take a look at the shape of this curve without really necessarily looking at the details. On the left side of the curve is basically a straight line showing the increasing average annual temperature of the planet in the past. So we're on almost a linear increasing trajectory of a warming planet, a heating planet. But in the gray area, you see what this report was all about, which is to say, what does it take in order to level this thing off by the end of the century? And the next slide shows, and this is the really important one, which says if we're going to make that other slide, the first slide, come true, the one that has that linear trajectory leveling off and creating a livable future for our children and grandchildren, we have to apply this curve here. This one, which says that we have to globally reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, really, really steeply. And because it's kind of an envelope, the later we wait, the steeper the reductions have to be. But in general, We have to cut our emissions by about half by 2030, clock is ticking, and reach zero by 2050. That's what the road to resilience is all about. How do we do that? Here in Manitoba, how can we get as close as we possibly can to creating that kind of a future for ourselves? So we took that information we got from the town hall and other subject matter experts. We had numerous meetings with all kinds of different groups. We initially hoped to have gatherings in person, but then COVID got in the road and we went to Zoom. But in February of 2021, we released this 50-page document, Road to Resilience, which provides a pathway to a fossil fuel-free, climate-resilient future for Manitoba. It's a pathway, okay? And when we say resilient, what we mean is this. Resilience to us means being able to meet our essential needs ourselves without fossil fuels. And when I say essential needs, what are they? Well, there's 4 key technical needs, if you will. We need to be able to feed ourselves without fossil fuel-based fertilizer and without diesel for the machinery. We need to be able to move all goods and people without gasoline or diesel. And we need to be able to heat all of our buildings, old and new, without fossil gas, without natural gas. And we need to use our electrical and energy resources as effectively and efficiently as we possibly can to meet those other 3 technical challenges. In the Road to Resilience, we have those four technical topics have their own chapters, but we have 3 additional chapters in the Road to Resilience pathway, and we call those the foundational chapters. So as we move forward with the technical solutions, we have to be faithful to and cognizant of the needs for, we have to, the needs for economy and green jobs. We need to make way for and address climate injustices and human impacts of climate change. And we also need to leave room for the other species and green space and the ecologies and ecosystems of the planet, of the province. Again, this is a Manitoba-focused document and study. So we published that first pathway in 2021. 2022, we published the Road to Resilience Energy Solutions. And most of my talk in the solutions portion is going to be related to the energy solutions. And energy solutions tackled 2 of those technical problems. That how do we heat our buildings and fuel our vehicles without fossil fuels? How do we do that electrically, primarily? That's what that analysis was all about. And we didn't just put words in paragraphs, we put numbers to it. Remember my first slide was showing me as an engineer? That's sort of where I'm coming from. I don't feel comfortable in tackling a problem unless I can put numbers to it. And so that's what the Road Resilience Energy Solutions focused on, is coming up with numbers related to that challenge of heating our buildings and fueling our vehicles electrically. How much power and how much energy is required. Power and energy are related, but they're different. Okay? Power is instantaneous, moment by moment, and energy is an integral over time. That's energy. So the Road to Resilience Energy Solutions dealt with both of those. And in general, we got numbers from Hydro that their 2018 load forecast report estimated that in order to meet peak demand, that instantaneous power demand, we would need about 200% more than we have right now. 200% more than we have right now. And energy, over the course of a year, we would require about 100% more. We'd have to double the energy that we supply, that we can have access to over the course of the year. So how do we do that? But we said in the Road to Resilience, it's not a maybe, it's a how do we do that? We can't give up. That has to be the target. And we said we can keep our minds open. If we need nuclear, if we need another dam, we don't want one and we don't want nuclear, but if we need it, let's think about it. Open our minds. Well, luckily, we don't need either of those things, okay? Just to let you know ahead of time that that's out there. And also, again, spoiler alert, we can also do it economically and for the good of the people that live here in Manitoba. So we're not going to break the bank doing this, okay? So we've got this energy solutions calculations analysis on paper now. Since we published it, we've learned a few things, and we'd like to tweak it a little bit and massage it and enhance it. That's necessary, but at least we've got a full story there that can be adjusted. Now, we've taken that as a target. Those things need to be implemented. How do we do that? That moves us into policy and policy suggestions. So we've been releasing this year a series of 3 policy documents. The first one is the Road Resilience Policy Solutions Coordination and Finance. That's really important. We'll get into the details. Coordination and finance. The second one is commercial and residential buildings. And the third one is vehicle electrification. Okay? Now, if you want to see what we have released so far, you can go to our website, the Climate Action Team website, and just click it one more time there, and you can see the address that you can seek out to get all of this information. You can download the PDFs, you can look at pieces of it, etc. Okay?
Are all the 3 solutions, or all 3 volumes, all online?
Yes, except for the one that's not online is the policy solutions for vehicle electrification. It's right now at the graphic designer. Okay, so we're very close to getting that one out too. Okay, thanks. So I was talking about what the targets are, that the zero emissions by 2050, but there's also an impetus for this. There's some people looking at us that want to see us achieve this, and that is primarily young people. I mean, let's face it, we're leaving a planet to those who follow us, and we have to make sure that we do it respectfully and leave something worthwhile for them. And I use this photograph here of Greta Thunberg because she was sort of like a spark plug that got a lot of things going and showed youth that you can make things happen. And here in Manitoba, it's not just youth. There's everyone. I mean, those of us who participated in the September 2019, just before COVID event, recognized there's different estimates between 12 and 15,000 people in that march. It was very, very encouraging. And it was largely organized and initiated by youth. It was a youth-led, youth-initiated event that became like a wildfire. And then more recently, in the provincial election just passed, the Consider Climate Manitoba movement had really gratifying results, even though it was organized in a relatively short time. It was so gratifying to see how many people realized that climate is important, even though it wasn't really a hugely vocal part of in the election we just had. There were a lot of electors that were concerned about it. I mean, I just walked through my neighborhood and I was really happy to see the signs. And that was part of the reason for this movement, is just to show your neighbors, yeah, I'm concerned about it, and share it with your neighbors, and maybe others will pick it up. So now let's get into the details of what the solution is all about. So the starting point, let's look at sort of like the hierarchy of importance, if you will, and where the solutions fit. This is a pie chart of Manitoba's greenhouse gas emissions for the year 2021, which is the most recent data that is available to us. And if you look at the different quadrants in there, the green one, the biggest one, is transportation, and there's another big one which is agriculture, and the third is it's called stationary combustion, but it's space heating, primarily fossil gas. And we focused on those three in Road to Resilience. And what I'm going to be sharing with you tonight is mostly the buildings, the stationary combustion, and the transportation one. And the numbers we have is relative to the emissions that come from those two sectors. Agriculture is a different set of chemicals, actually, because the emissions from agriculture are primarily methane and nitrous oxide, whereas the emissions in the transportation and buildings are carbon dioxide. And so there's a different set of solutions there, and there's also a whole bunch of a different economics involved there. So we'll deal with that later. We've been working on that one as well, but we're going to concentrate on those other two. So I shared with you these four topics previously. Let's dive into the four details. So we'll start with the first one, which is food. Now, most of my presentation is not going to be about the food, but I thought just for completeness, I will deal with at least the key topic areas of solution that we have with respect to food. The first one is more local food. Instead of bringing carrots from California or stuff from halfway around the world, the more we can feed ourselves locally, whether that's our own home gardens in our backyard, or whether it's like this Sustainable South Osborne, which has a community garden, and besides generating food, they also generate community connectivity and connectivity between different age groups, elders and youth, and have a real sense of community going on there with the food share that they have. Also, bringing the producer closer to the consumer in a couple of different ways. This is the South Osborne Farmers Market. Farmers markets have an opportunity for producers to provide their goods directly to consumers, and again, to shorten those travel miles. And also, a lot of times the way it's produced is more organically, more simply. Okay? And then the other way to get connected closely between the consumer and the producer is called customer supported agriculture, CSAs. So you can come to an arrangement with the producer and get boxes of vegetables and fruit when they're appropriate at different times of the year. And then there's another concept, which is nutrient recycling. And at the household level, composting in your backyard, but there's also composting at an industrial level and composting in agriculture. And I'm not going to go into the details, but those are there. And then the final concept that I've got here is a whole approach to agriculture called regenerative agriculture. And regenerative agriculture, if you notice the circle on the far left, it includes livestock. Because in that case, I'm mostly vegetarian, and a lot of people who are concerned about the climate are mostly vegetarian, but I'm learning that there's a potential place for cattle for soil health, and a place for that in regenerative agriculture. It's very interesting. Got to keep an open mind with this stuff, okay? And that last piece, a lot of people ask me, well, you said that we have to feed ourselves without diesel for the machinery, without fossil fuel-based fertilizers, without diesel for the machinery. What about that diesel for the machinery? Well, a lot of people go straight to electric for all vehicles. Well, farm equipment's different. And in the Road to Resilience, we talk about the potential for on-farm biodiesel. And the estimates we've got are, depending on the type of agriculture employed, you could produce the crop, a canola crop, about 7% of the crop would produce enough fuel for producing the crop. It's between 5 and 10%, depending on how many passes of the field and things like that you do. But if you think about it, that's not so much different than the way agriculture was in the beginning of the 20th century and before. Because there was a percentage, I was heard 30% of the farmer's land was for growing oats and feed for the draft animals. So it's a kind of conceptually a similar kind of investment. Okay? So that's food. That's as far as I'm going to go with food. Now we get into these other these other three technical topics. And the first one is transportation. Now, we're very clear in the well, it hasn't been released yet, but the transportation chapter is focused on vehicle electrification. But we have a preamble that says we can reduce the challenge of vehicle electrification by reducing our dependence on vehicles as much as we can. And so we start with, do we need to travel at all? Like we've got in the last few years because of COVID, we've had a pretty good practice on how to use Zoom and all these different virtual presence kinds of techniques for not traveling, instead meeting and accomplishing the same thing. It's amazing. I mean, I did 5 meetings today by Zoom, right? Like I never could have done that if we had to travel between them. But anyways, there's a place for that. The next thing is not using, sorry, I'm on one behind. Sorry, go to the next one. That was the virtual. This is the next one, which is if you can get someplace without a vehicle, that will reduce the requirement for electrifying, supplying that power and energy for vehicles. But realizing that bicycles aren't a universal solution when it comes to transportation. First of all, it's difficult to bring plywood home on your bicycle, even though I have a friend who moved his entire apartment with a cargo bike, with a special tricycle cargo bike. But typically, it's good for replacing trips of 6 kilometers or less. But there's a new calculation now because of electric bikes, but it's fairly short distances. Next one. Another alternative to vehicle transportation is public transit. And now because of COVID and other things, there's a lot of complexity when it comes to public transit. But here in Winnipeg, I'm very pleased to point out to us all that we have the Transit Master Plan. And it was adopted by council a few years ago. And I would recommend that if you're interested in transportation, this is a very good document. There are some really good ideas, and if we implement this, we'll be well along towards a solution here. I don't have it in this presentation, but there's another document that the City of Winnipeg adopted called the Community Energy Investment Roadmap. And that's another very inspiring document that is very similar to the Road to Resilience. It looked at the challenge of getting to zero emissions in the City of Winnipeg, and the two are run in parallel. It's really quite remarkable how much the two are in alignment with each other. So the Community Energy Investment Roadmap, or the CER report. Another alternative is if you're going to use vehicles, you don't necessarily have to own a vehicle. I haven't owned a vehicle since 2008, and it's good that I live near the center of town. I live in the Curt Village area, so I'm close to a lot of things. That's important. The form of the city is important. This solution isn't quite as easy for people in rural reality, but for me, I haven't needed a car since 2008, and I save a lot of money. I'm a member of the Peg City Car Co-op, and I ride my bicycle. I rode my bike here, etc. Next. And but whenever I talk about climate change and whenever I talk about solutions to climate change, everybody goes, yeah, I really want to get an electric car. Right? Oh, I can't. Oh, they're too expensive, but I really want one. That's the sexy solution that everybody gravitates towards immediately. I focused on buildings because it's the tough one, but the necessary one, but everybody goes to electric vehicles. Okay, let's talk about electric vehicles. The reason I don't really spend a lot of time or attention on electric vehicles is because of this graph here. This is the last graph, by the way, of I got another one, a table. But anyways, this one's important, though. If you think about the cost to the manufacturer of producing the drivetrain of a vehicle, the cost of manufacture is going up based on inflation. So it's got this increase to it. But the cost of manufacture of electric vehicles is coming down exponentially. And those two cost curves will cross at some point. It's interesting that I've been using this graph. It was shared with with me this came from Al Gore's organization, the Climate Reality Project, and it was shared with me in 2017. And it projected that those two curves would cross in between 2023 and 2024. And I think we're pretty close to seeing that reality. Now, we're not necessarily going to see that reality in the showroom when you and I go to buy the car. But from the manufacturer's perspective, it's very possible. And the reason I say that, and I almost think, and it's inevitable, is if you think about the number of components in an internal combustion engine vehicle that's able to meet the pollution control requirements, and if you lift the hood and all those pieces that are in there, versus an electric vehicle, which is a motor, a control box, and the drivetrain, there's a lot less components to it. So it just makes sense to me that I think this is a plausible curve here. So if that's the case, and the other thing, so that's from the manufacturer's perspective, is that the economics work. But from a consumer's perspective, that I was saying how people think that electric vehicles is so sexy, is because it's going to save them a lot of money. People that I know that have electric vehicles, they talk about, really a small percentage of what they used to spend on gas fill-ups every week. Now it's just they plug it in the garage and they just use it, right? So I've heard something like 20%. You take your vehicle cost, or your fuel cost, and reduce it to about 20% of what it was before, and that doesn't take into account all the other stuff related to oil changes and the air sensor that went and all the rest of it. So electric vehicle transportation is, I say, inevitable. Okay? So, and as the years go by, so that's the economics from a consumer's perspective, from a manufacturer's perspective, but then there's the availability and competition within the market. And every year you see more manufacturers, more models, more types of vehicles on the market all the time. And one of the most important ones for here in Manitoba is this one here. You say what you will about its appropriateness, but Manitobans love Ford F-150s, and there's now a Lightning F-150. But other vehicles need to be electrified. I'm very happy to know or to be aware of the sustainable bus project that the City of Winnipeg Transit has on the go. And I've talked to Erin, the project manager. She's a really smart engineer, and she's got it correct. And actually part of this solution includes hydrogen. It's interesting. I was opposed to hydrogen, but because of the limited time that transit has to recharge, hydrogen may be and also heating the buses in the wintertime. Anyways, I'm getting off track. Another vehicle here that I think is really necessary is school buses. I mean, if you've got any kids and you hang around the school and you see the bus, idling, and the bus gets filled up with diesel fuel, whereas an electric bus makes sense. And this one here comes from Quebec, Lion Industries. And then the last one is semis, highway transportation. And technically, the Tesla semi is very attractive. When I watched when this was announced a few years ago, the slides that were presented were almost completely economic slides because this is a commercial vehicle. It has to be profitable for the operator. And the slides all showed how this vehicle would be profitable for the operator. And another aspect of it was, if you put it together with autonomous vehicles, you could have a train of these kinds of semis all running together, nose to jowl, and because of drafting, they could economically compete with rail without the rail lines. So that's vehicles, that's transportation. The next topic is going to be buildings, and this is the important one. And there you go, buildings. Now, the buildings challenge is the most important and the most difficult, okay? But in tackling the buildings challenge, how do we heat all of our buildings, old and new, without fossil gas? And I only say heat, I don't say heat and cool, because already cool is electric, like your air conditioners are electric, you don't have natural gas air conditioners, but also the demand is far, far lower, so far. we'll see where we go with global heating. But the solution has got two aspects to it, both related to efficiency. The building itself needs to be as efficient as possible, and the electricity that we use to heat it needs to be as efficient as possible. So those are the two aspects, the building and the electric heating. So the first slide here relates to the building itself. This photograph that you see here is the first passive house certified building in Manitoba. Randy Weber's house up near Gimli, and it was a breakthrough kind of development here, where we had energy modeling and local architects and local builders. This is Eric Bjornsson was the builder, and working together to create something really, really remarkable and inspiring. So that was the first building, and the passive house means that the building uses far, far less even than a code building. Compared to the previous code, something like 20% of the energy that a code built building would require in a passive house building. And Randy, the first winter, he said he had to put more window coverings in the wintertime to keep the house from getting too warm, because it's south-facing windows, and even at 20 below, it was starting to get too warm. So we had to put more window coverings to keep the thing from getting too warm, okay? So think about the energy bills there. Not very much, not very high, right? But we've got a lot of old buildings, that's okay. We've got a lot of old buildings, and they're the biggest part of the challenge, because it's not going to be cheap or easy to really bring them up to anything close to a passive house standard. It can be done. This photograph here is of the Sun Certified Builders Co-op, and they have some very innovative approaches to adding insulation to the outside of the building. What you see here are Larson trusses. It's a Larson truss that they attach to the outside of the building, and they raise the roof. Basically, you can add 18 inches of blown cellulose insulation on the outside of the building, so you don't have to rip out the interior walls, but it's still expensive. In the neighborhood of $100,000. This building here was $100,000 to do. 60,000, 100,000, depends on how much you want to do. But if you already need to replace the exterior, if you've already got foundation work required, you could consider doing this. There's another possible approach, which is this one here, a panelized energy efficient retrofit, and the pier approach. This is being experimented by Enercan is experimenting on this, and you take a computer generated image of the building, and then in a factory you build these panels and you bring them out to the site and you apply them. So it reduces the labor costs and the time and the disturbance required to bring the building up to a much higher performance standard. Now this slide has got air source heat pumps in it, and a lot of times people talk about air source heat pumps, and air source heat pumps will make the energy efficiency of your heating much improved. It will. But it won't solve the central challenge that I posed at the very beginning. How do we heat all of our buildings, old and new, electrically? If that's the challenge, we need to depend on the grid being able to supply that instantaneous power on a cold January morning in the future when it's 35 below and the sun's not up yet and everybody's trying to warm up their houses at the same time, because that's our peak demand. If we have air source heat pumps as the supplement to our resistive heating, we won't be able to supply it. It's at that temperature, 30 below, air source heat pumps are no more efficient than a baseboard heater. So hydro wouldn't be able to supply it. Instead, this brings me to the really important nucleus of my presentation here, which is geothermal, ground source heat pumps. Because this will provide the energy efficiency of heating that we absolutely need. Okay, I'm going to talk about coefficient of performance. Roughly speaking, if you've got a resistive heater, like a baseboard heater or one of those little heaters, it's got a coefficient of performance of 1. So in other words, if you put a kilowatt, 1,000 watts of power into it, you get 1,000 watts of heat out of it. But hydro can't supply enough power to meet a coefficient of 1 kind of heating solution. That's where their 200% came from, was based on resistive heating. That's why they say we need 200% more power. But we can reduce that demand completely if we use geothermal, because a properly designed, engineered, installed, and managed geothermal system has a coefficient of performance of 4, meaning that if you put 1 kilowatt of power in, you get 4 kilowatts of heat. You can easily do 3, but if it's really well done, you can get 4. If we hit 3, we can meet, the numbers will work for meeting our peak demand. Okay? Now a lot of people go, but that's expensive and it takes a long time to pay it back. Absolutely. I'm not talking about solutions here that depend on you or I working individually. This is a systemic problem. It requires a systemic solution. And that is very, very apparent when it comes to geothermal. Because if you or I want to do it, like look at, okay, it's going to cost $20,000, I'm going to have to rip up my yard, and the payback is like going to be 20, 15 years, I don't know, depending on who calculates it, at least 10 years. Excuse me. So that, and then if I do it now, and then a few years from now my neighbor does theirs, they may conflict with each other. Instead, what we are proposing is geothermal as a utility, a thermal energy services utility. That's how the fossil gas network, the natural gas network, was installed in the first place a few decades ago. Why not geothermal? It was taken on by a utility so that, and working at a district level. I'm going to paint a picture for you. They talk about the hope at the beginning. Okay, this is my hopeful future. Okay, and this is in the Road to Resilience Coordination and Finance document. These are the proposals that we put forward. There are 4 key ones. We create a climate emergency secretariat so that we get rid of the silos between the different crown corporations and government and business and everything. We have a secretariat that manages the whole thing, and instead of all of us applying for funding, this secretariat is saying what we're going to be doing and manages the whole project. We're talking about financing, so that as long as there's a federal carbon tax, we should be using that money, that levy, for the solution that gets us off of having to pay the tax. So if we had a fund, if that carbon tax stayed in Manitoba as a fund that would be used for a zero interest PACE loan, property assessed clean energy loan, that would bring up the energy efficiency of existing buildings with a zero interest loan that stays with the property. Okay? That's the second one. The other one is redirect Efficiency Manitoba, so that they are, instead of the mandate they have now, which is 1.5% reduction of electricity and a 0.75% reduction of fossil gas, they would be directed to reduce greenhouse gases in Manitoba through the efficient use of electricity. And then the creation of a geothermal utility. Those are the key things in the coordination and finance document. And what we would do, like I foresee having this entity, this Secretariat, Efficiency Manitoba, this new geothermal utility, going neighborhood by neighborhood, municipality by municipality, bringing in energy advisors to do assessments, energy audits, energy modeling of the system, working with the building owners. Do you want to be connected to this system? If you do, you need to have your energy of your efficiency of your building up to a certain minimum. We'll help you with that with the zero interest PACE loans. And by the way, some of that carbon tax goes back to the lowest income households, so they continue to get the rebate that they do now. and some of it goes to fund the operation of Efficiency Manitoba. And they come into my neighborhood, they come into your neighborhood, and they talk to all of the building owners, and they say, do you want to be connected? Okay, if you want to be connected, here's the audit we're going to do. We can model the whole system, and they start to lay out a district system, and that's what this photograph is about, using directional drilling, horizontal drilling, to connect the system together. So there will be wells, deep wells, at each end of the system potentially, like there'll be a deep well, and then maybe smaller wells every so many houses, or under the street, or under the boulevard. But it connects them all together, and at the end of this is where it's really important. You wind up with really low energy bills. And you wind up with air conditioning as a necessary part of this. Because geothermal is not an energy source. It's a thermal battery. And just like any other battery, you have to recharge it in the summer so that you can draw from it in the winter. So if you don't air condition, you're not going to be putting heat into the ground. So you have to air condition. So you wind up with really comfortable homes. And they cost you less in the long run. There's an investment up front. There's an investment in the utility. There's an investment in the energy upgrades. But when you're done, you have efficient, high-value homes that are really comfortable to live in. And you've satisfied the biggest challenge in the climate problem. Okay? That's what gets me going in the morning, because I think this is doable and beneficial to us all. So that's buildings. The next one is, how do we provide the necessary energy? Yeah, one more click there. One more, the energy and electricity for meeting the challenge. So we said we don't need a new dam, and we don't need nuclear reactors or anything like that, but we do need wind. We have been, our scenarios that we've been playing around with different numbers, we've put different values in here, but we're talking sort of in the neighborhood of 3,000 megawatts of generating capability. Maybe more, maybe less. No, maybe more. But anyways, yeah, that's what does that mean, 3,000 megawatts? Well, right now with the Saint Joseph and Saint Leon wind farms that are currently in existence, they generate about 260 megawatts. So, that's a lot more. Well, but, yeah, click one more time. There you go. So, but if you compare that to our neighbor in North Dakota, they already have 3,000 megawatts of generating, and they're a smaller land area than we are. And Ontario's got way more yet. So this is doable if we just want to do it. It is doable. Okay. I mean, you have to do it. You have to make sure you're not on a bird migration path and stuff like that. You got to put them in the right place. So you got the wind and all the rest of it, but it is doable. Next one. Now, solar. Solar is a challenge, because remember that scenario, the most difficult scenario, which is a January morning in the future at 6 o'clock in the morning. The sun's not up yet, and everybody's trying to warm their houses up and make toast. Well, the solar panels aren't going to work as long as they're by themselves. The only way that solar will really contribute to that peak demand challenge, which is the biggest challenge that we've got, is if they're connected to some kind of storage. And there's a couple of different storage mechanisms. I'm going to talk about 3 of them. The first one is, vehicle electrification is a demand, a challenge. We got to charge them, but by the same token, they are also big batteries that can provide power when you need it. And there's some technical challenges here. Not all vehicles this is called vehicle-to-grid technology. Not all vehicles are currently set this way. That Ford Lightning is, so that actually they advertise it that you can connect it to your house and supply power from during a power outage. You can use your truck to provide essential power to your home or whatever. So this is vehicle-to-grid is one potential form of storage. And that's in the road resilience. We put a number to it. It's not huge, but it's in there. Another one is domestic batteries. This one that I'm showing you here is the Tesla Powerwall. There are no Tesla Powerwalls in Manitoba. There have been hurdles that still have to be overcome when it comes to permitting for power walls. And Hydro doesn't want them connected to the grid. They don't trust them and stuff like that. But we have to get over that. They're also talking in CSA, they're talking about not allowing them in residences. You have to put them out in the garage, which is really bad because at 30 below you don't have near the same kind of energy carrying capacity. But that's a whole other thing. Anyways, so storage in vehicles, storage in your domestic batteries, and then the next one is thermal storage directly. There are ways to take, in Finland, they take electrical power from their photovoltaic solar, and they use it to heat storage underground. And actually, Bill Gates has got a carbon furnace solution going on that has got some real potential to have a thermal battery underground that can provide a lot of heat directly. This photograph that I have here is actually not photovoltaics, but rather a direct heating. And one of the things that people are concerned about geothermal is what happens if it runs out of power, or if it's not functioning properly. What can you do to remedy it? And one of the potential remedies is if you've got a system that is tending to cool over the years, you can add additional heat by sending the fluid through one of these kinds of arrays on the top of a garage or something like that, and adding additional heat into your thermal battery in your system. So the last couple slides is just to reiterate how we put numbers to this. I'm not going to go through these numbers, but you can see that we've got numbers in this. And we did for a while, actually click it one more time there, because we've got numbers that at least show you where the important solutions are quantitatively. And then we did some projections as to, can we keep up with the population growth? Can we keep up with vehicle increases in the number of vehicles and stuff like that? And depending on how we manage things, it's still possible. So that really is the last click, brings us to the end of the presentation. And now you won't have to hear me talk anymore, and now I can hear you talk and ask questions and have some discussion. So. Stay here?
Oh, we're going to have questions right away.
Yeah, but should I
Okay,
stay?
well, we can start the questions right away, but I was going to say you want to take a 5-minute break, you can get another piece of pizza and maybe a drink.
Yeah.
Or do you want to keep going? Keep going, okay. Get your pizza, get your drink while we're talking. Thanks, Curt, that was great. Ask away.
I'll let you just...
Yeah, and if you ask a question, I'll repeat it for everybody so that you can hear it. Yo, okay, yes.
Can you explain to me, you mentioned hydrogen, when you're talking about mass transit, you're talking about hydrogen fueled, and I don't know what that is. Can you explain what that process is?
Yeah, the question has to do with hydrogen, and because I had mentioned in the public transit slide and electrification of public transit that hydrogen might be part of the solution. Okay, now hydrogen is a potential green fuel source, because when you burn hydrogen, it just produces water. It doesn't produce any carbon dioxide, it just produces water. So it's considered green, except that most hydrogen on the planet, if you go and buy hydrogen, the hydrogen will have been extracted from natural gas. They break natural gas apart and they extract the hydrogen molecules off of the natural gas. But hydrogen can also be produced by electrolysis. Sometimes in high school, you can do electrolysis with salt water and 2 electrodes, and you can, little bubbles of hydrogen break the oxygen away from the hydrogen in H2O up from the water, and you wind up with hydrogen coming up in the test tubes. So you can produce hydrogen that way, and it's now something that's stored and transportable, okay? There's also, in the case of Winnipeg Transit, they're looking at hydrogen sourced not necessarily from electrolysis, although Selkirk is talking about an electrolysis facility at their wastewater treatment plant, and coming up with an electrolysis facility there, using solar as well as other things for splitting the water molecules apart. But apparently there is a chemical factory in Brandon at which hydrogen is a byproduct of their process, and there's enough produced at that factory that it supplies actually many times over the current demand of Winnipeg Transit. So that allows transit because transit the buses are in operation most of the day except for about 4 hours at night. And if all the buses in the whole fleet have to be charged, batteries have to be charged at the same time, the demand is huge, right? And they can offset some of that recharge challenge by using hydrogen for some of the buses and some of the energy for the bus, and also potentially for some of the heating. Like in the wintertime, you can use the heat directly for the hydrogen directly for heating the bus.
And do you know what kind of chemical plant in Brandon?
I can't remember what Aaron told me it was, but it was.
Would it be practical to fuel a whole citywide mass transit from hydrogen?
The question is, would it be practical to provide
electrolysis?
Electrolysis? Would it be practical to provide all of the power for city transit from hydrogen?
And from electrolysis?
From electrolysis.
Rather than extracted from the earth, or natural gas,
Yeah.
which is polluting.
Well, absolutely. Any hydrogen that's used cannot come from natural gas. Anybody talks about using hydrogen, that's the first question they ask is, where are you going to get your hydrogen from?
Okay.
And have you done the numbers as to whether or not you can supply enough using hydrogen for that requirement? And I suspect, again, my work is all in Winnipeg and Manitoba, and the numbers I've got from transit, we don't need that much because we can supply it from the grid, augmented from electrolysis, hydrogen, and from this chemical plant in Brandon.
Okay, so electrolysis produced hydrogen can be used on a large scale?
It can be used on a large scale. Electrolysis, hydrogen can be used on a large scale, but my thinking is it shouldn't be the first solution. Battery storage is more efficient than hydrogen because hydrogen has got various inefficiencies of conversion involved to it. It's a little more complicated. Sorry? Yeah.
I have a question about what you were talking about, semis versus rails, saying that if you have like a train of semis, but maybe that works in some places, but that doesn't address like passenger, like people using the train for transport. It doesn't address that.
No.
And right now, I mean, there isn't even buses to most of the rural areas anymore. There isn't even vans operating post-COVID, to most of the rural areas in Manitoba, let alone, rail, or anything like that. And so, I mean, that's a real problem. But also the whole issue of, like, everything I've read so far is basically saying that, electric cars are about saving the car companies, not so much saving the planet. And, it seems to me that mass transport at all levels has to be part of, a major part of the solution here, that, you can't replace one-for-one everybody's car in Manitoba, let alone projecting into the future.
Yeah. The question primarily is, if I can characterize it, is primarily concerned about moving people in rural areas, because we've got urban
and goods
in rural areas, and absolutely it is a big challenge to solve those challenges is difficult, and I have another version of this slideshow that focuses on rural areas, and I do talk about potential for shuttle buses and ride share opportunities for rural communities, so that instead of driving alone to do your shopping, there's also, it's a complicated solution because now you're talking about a societal change, and the road resilience just had to have some scope and some boundaries on our analysis, but our analysis did show that we could provide enough electricity to replace all of the vehicles we have now electrically, and we can provide enough power and energy for all of the vehicles we have now, and some growth into the future. I think we run out at around 2040. We can't sustain the growth in the number of vehicles going into the future.
Can I ask one more question? Because you mentioned Passive House. I'm part of the Boundary and Green Housing.
Are you?
Yeah. And so I'm on the design committee triple the cost of regular building.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and so it's unaffordable what we're looking at now is unaffordable.
Okay, so the question here relates to, I'm glad to meet you, that you're on the Bannerman Green project, which is in the north end. There's a group of homeowners and housing co-op group that want to create a housing co-op, which includes individual residences as well as a central building. Now, with geothermal, you don't have to go all the way, and the question was about the cost of going all the way to passive house, because it can add a premium on the cost of construction. Yeah, and which takes quite a long time to recoup. But if you couple not necessarily all the way to passive house, but just efficient construction with geothermal, you can meet the energy requirements at a much more affordable price. And actually, I've been talking to Dudley, that's the architect that you've been working with, and the city and the MLA for that district. And there's a potential that we can actually maybe even have Bannerman Green as one of those first geothermal district systems. So that's what we're kind of working towards. Yes?
You were talking about a system, I think it was somewhere in Sweden or Finland, where you have solar and stored heat. You don't have to go that far, just go to Alberta. Drake's Landing.
Drake's Landing?
Drake's Landing.
Okay.
It was done quite a few years ago, and they have a salt brine solution, and they have everything they need, the whole community. So that should be somewhere in your information.
Very good. That's good to share with me. Drake's Landing in Alberta. The question was related to or consequential to what I shared about that system in Finland, where they take photovoltaics and they use it to heat the ground, and then you have thermal storage in the ground. This kind of brings me to a sort of a central theme here, which that I think is important, and that is that if you think about the problem that we're facing here, it really relates to our challenge of reconciliation and learning from Indigenous people and the Indigenous worldview. And this is how I see a connection. What got us here, the reason why we're in this situation, is because of the linear thinking that came with us from Europe. That we thought that everything works in a line. And if you think about fossil fuels, we extract it from the ground, we burn it, and then we put it into the atmosphere in a line. Okay, and then it's building up in the atmosphere. That line isn't working. But the central part of my presentation here was talking about storage. Storage of electricity, storage of thermal storage. And that, if you think about it, really resonates with Indigenous worldview and circular thinking. This thinking of taking the heat from the summer, storing it underground, and then bringing it back up in the wintertime when you need it, and then putting it back in again, and bringing it back up again. And then the same thing with energy. You take the solar and taking that energy from the sun and storing it, and then bringing it back when you need it. And that to me is where the two coincide, where reconciliation and adoption of respectful worldview, Indigenous worldview, aligns with the climate solutions that we're working towards. Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. This is such an important question to be getting at. How can we get there? And I love your starting point that we know what is necessary, so how do we make the necessary possible? I think that's a great framework. My question is on the building side.
Okay. Questions from the building side. Okay.
So we have about, if my numbers are right, somewhere between 42 and 43,000 single-family residential houses in Winnipeg. Winnipeg, never mind outside. Let's say we're talking about $100,000 per house for a deep energy retrofit.
Yeah.
I think the PACE loan idea is low-hanging fruit. Absolutely, we have to go there. There's no reason why we can't drop 5 to 0% PACE loans that attach to the property. The question is, where's the financing come from to capitalize that fund for those loans in the first place. So is the carbon tax revenue enough to capitalize a fund that would enable within, let's say, a 10-year period, homeowners to make it possible for them to finance a deep energy retrofit, or even just getting it to high efficiency standard or something like that? Or do we need to start talking about other kinds of financing mechanisms? Do we need to start talking about public banking in Manitoba as a way to finance this? Or how will we, I know you must get this question all the time, how do we finance and make it possible for a middle class or a low income homeowner to do what is necessary to get us to net zero by 2050?
I hope that was loud enough that you could hear that question from.
Sorry, I shout all the time.
That's great. The university professors, it's great. They project. So, the terrific question. And there's a potentially different solutions here, and you can put different numbers to it, because you can change the amortization period, the payback period, and to go out 50 years for the loan, and maybe that's too long. And if you can reduce that to something that's more realistic, but you may have to then augment the funding source with from the carbon tax with something else, like you say, with green bonds or some public bank or something like that. But there's also, we can reduce the amount of draw from that revenue source by what I mentioned, sort of a minimum energy performance level for buildings. You may have a building that's performing well enough without having to do a lot of retrofit to it. You may not have to spend $100,000 on your home in order to have it performing at a level that's consistent with the rest of that district system. So you don't have to calculate the revenue requirement based on all of the buildings in the province. You can reduce the number of buildings that have to dip into it. But also, let's remember that revenue source is replenishable. This is a carbon tax that is replenished every year. So there's money that comes in from the carbon tax every year, and if the federal government, they're in trouble right now, but if it keeps going up at the rate that they have projected, you've got this increasing revenue stream coming in. Plus, because it's not spent, it's loaned, you also get repayment into it. And so if you manage that implementation with the central climate emergency secretariat that is planning it municipality by municipality or neighborhood by neighborhood, you can time the revenue stream and the expenditure such that the two keep track with each other.
So just super quick follow-up. So if it's not financing, what do you think is the most significant policy obstacle to achieving the road to resilience as you've mapped out? What's preventing us from moving forward with this and retrofitting homes and electrifying the vehicular fleet and mending the grid?
So the question is, what is the biggest challenge? And the biggest challenge is accepting that zero emissions by 2050 is the target, is the challenge. That's not generally accepted. Certainly not by government, and certainly not by us as the electorate. We don't see it as an emergency, because for the most part, we're not suffering terribly when it comes to climate change. We don't see it. We're too comfortable. I have to say that. That we don't see it as an emergency. We don't see it as something that it's necessary to work on right now. It's the consciousness is coming up. I was very gratified by the reception that the Consider Climate Manitoba has received. That's really encouraging to see how many of my neighbors actually get it and think that this is something necessary. And if you put it into the frame of, this isn't something that's going to make you poor and have to freeze in the dark. Instead, we've got to potentially benefit from this, a potential benefit. Another aspect of our analysis is the number of jobs that are potentially an outcome of this. But the thing is that, the back to your question, the central thing is we don't recognize that the challenge and the objective. Yes?
I think there's a lot of potential with the new government that we have now, that we can get people working together
so federal funding, provincial jurisdiction with Manitoba Hydro, and the city. The inner city needs new sewers, for example. So if it was timed right, you have the sewers being put in with geothermal being applied at the same time. And I'm wondering if are you seeing other cities having different levels working together in innovative ways that give cost savings along the way and, like real bang for your buck?
Yeah, the question relates to the potential for, now that we have a new government coming in and the prospect is for more cooperation between the different levels of government, and also potentially the potential for incorporating geothermal at the same time as other infrastructure projects is concerned. Again, I told you I was hopeful, and I was, because of what happened on Tuesday, my hope remains. My optimism comes and goes sometimes, but I think there's a real opportunity and a real potential here. We do have a government that at least is, the first thing that Premier Canoe did was he met with Mayor Gillingham next day, right, after the election. So, and I don't think the previous Premier met with, at all. Certainly Pallister didn't. And all that Brian could do was argue about Ottawa. Whereas Ottawa, and I met with a lot of MPs, and they go, we'd like to do stuff. And they've left money on the table that was not was not taken advantage of provincially because of this pissing match that was going on between the different levels. So I'm hopeful. Again, remains to be seen, but I'm going to continue to talk to people that potentially will have influence, and that's really where the answer is anyways, is in cooperation. Us as citizens and different levels of government. Yes?
Are you seeing that in other cities? Are you seeing examples of that in other cities, other countries?
I don't spend a lot of my time looking outside of Manitoba. I'm on the board of Climate Reality Canada, and so I have a bit of connections across the country, but when I started to get involved in climate change, in the very early years, I was so optimistic. I was so, this is a global problem. We're going to solve this thing. 2009, I started in 2007. In 2009, we had the Copenhagen Conference of the Parties, and we were so optimistic, and it didn't happen. I was so devastated. Since then, the only way I can maintain my sanity is to say, don't worry about stuff you can't have any influence over, stuff you can't do anything about, and I'm sometimes interested in it, but I focus on Manitoba and something that I think we can achieve something at here. And the solution is different for other jurisdictions. I think I have a good sense of what the solution is for Manitoba, because in Arizona, solar is it. That's the solution in Arizona. It's not the same here in Manitoba. It's just different realities. So I wish I could tell you about other places, but I don't have a lot of familiarity with them. Back at the back there?
Hi, Curt. Good to see you, and thank you. The Greener Homes program is out now with the inspections that are going on.
The Greener Homes program, okay?
Yes. Now, will those inspections be sufficient enough to meet the inspections you're talking about? Because there's a lot of uptake on that already.
Yeah.
Without duplicating process in time and cost.
Potentially, yes. The question has to do with there's a Greener Homes program, a federal Greener Homes program, and part of that Greener Homes program includes an energy audit as sort of a first step. And so the energy auditor will come into your home and evaluate its performance, and then give you a sort of a report card of what your home is performing, and then it recommends upgrades, and there's potential loan funding situation. I think a bit of grant and some loan. I think forget how the grant loan combination, right? Potentially the methodology should be transferable. Now I don't want to preclude how the project manager of this new entity is gonna want to do things. They may want to double check it from time to time. I don't know, but potentially yes, it could be, because the energy auditors, if I understand correctly, they use an EnerGuide standard.
Yeah, they're using 2000, whatever that.
Yeah, so as long as the auditing process is done to a standard and is repeatable,
Yeah.
it could be transferable.
Vapor test is a big part of it, where they test they vacuum test the house.
Yeah.
To see how much air is coming in.
Yeah.
And the windows or whatever are improvements.
Yeah, a lot of buildings, there's the blower door test for air infiltration. A lot of buildings, though, the way they operate will change over time. And sometimes it might depend on the length of time between when the first audit was done and when we implement this utility.
And just one thing about the solar thermal, I have a friend in Calgary that his company's been doing it in New Zealand and Australia, and they make a heat sink underneath the house when they build it, and the solar thermal gathers all summer, and after 3 years they're able to get to 60 degrees Celsius in that heat sink that they insulate, and he's been trying to get it going there.
Yeah, the potential for thermal storage is really remarkably important.
Let's just do one more.
One
more?
Yes?
Hi.
Oh,
Just to speak to quickly, the woman you asked about examples elsewhere about geothermal. I watch a lot of TV, even though I have a very small cable package, but I watch a lot of PBS and APTN and documentaries, and I did see New York City is apparently converting, I don't know if it's all of its islands, but